I've seen a ton of reviews out there for the Apple Watch for running, even a couple for cycling. And recently I switched from the Apple Watch to the Garmin Forerunner 935. And I couldn't find a ton of reviews out there specifically for these things related to cycling. But then I also wanted to put some information out there as to why I'm switching back to the Apple Watch in the event that anybody wants to make that same transition from the Apple Watch or to the Apple Watch, and why I feel it's a better watch for cycling, even for high level of cycling. So real quickly, just to cover a little bit about the Forerunner 935, it's a pretty great watch. It's a great fitness tracker and does a lot of the things you'd expect it to do. It's a similar price point as the Apple Watch. The number one thing here is battery life. This watch is amazing when it comes to battery life. You'll see this in all the other reviews. It will last anywhere from 1.5 to 2 weeks, and less if you're using it for a lot of GPS and fitness tracking. But typically you'll get multiple days out of this thing. It does do sleep tracking and heart rate monitoring, as everybody says, but it's probably not entirely accurate. I've had some nights where I was wearing it and it didn't. I know I was awake because I got up. My kids woke me up and I got up and put them back to sleep, and it didn't track that. Sometimes it will tell me that I went to bed earlier than I actually did. But what is nice is that it's tracking your heart rate through the night. So if you want to get an actual idea of your resting heart rate, this is a great feature, because my resting heart rate is in the mid 40s. But when you're wearing the Apple Watch, you typically don't see that low of a resting heart rate because it's only tracking it throughout the day. Depending on how you want to look at your resting heart rate, you might want to include the time with which you're asleep. This watch has every sport you could imagine tracking. I used it for walking, hiking, riding, indoors and outdoors, and strength training. It can do so much more, including, I think, like base jumping or parachuting. It's just pretty wild what it can do. The Garmin system is amazing with data. You get all sorts of data. Some of it is more accurate than others. Some of it's less accurate. Not really sure how I feel about the VO2 max and stress scores and things like that. It's sort of, take it with a grain of salt. It is what it is. It's a watch that tries to calculate those things, whereas normally you would need to go into a lab or use measuring tools like a power meter for FTP. And then the other benefit here is these physical buttons, which are really nice. You can sort of tap them with gloves on while you're riding. And the touch screen on the Apple Watch, you sort of have to peck and hunt and sort of tap on these small hit targets. So those are all positives. This is a really nice watch. But at the end of the day, I felt that the Apple Watch had far more benefits, a lot more features. And with the Apple Watch, the things that I missed when I went to the Garmin Forerunner, there's a lot of them. And basically what it comes down to is, if I'm wearing something on my wrist while I'm exercising, but then also throughout the entire day, I want something that's going to do more than just track fitness and tell the time, if that makes any sense. So the Apple Watch is much more than a fitness tracker. It's a smartwatch. It does pretty much everything that you might want it to do, plus some. So these pros here are primarily around the watch as it relates to using it when you're riding a bicycle. But just keep in mind that it just does so much more than the Garmin watch with respect to being a smartwatch. So if you're the type of person that's going to be wearing it all day and you want to get something more out of your watch than just being able to tell the time and say track specific fitness events, then this watch will give you that. And some of those things include the comfort of the band. So the Garmin Forerunner comes with a pretty typical watch band, but I felt that it has like these horizontal slats here in the band, and as you tighten this down on your wrist, some people might not have this issue, but as I tightened it down on my wrist, these things tended to pinch my skin, and it was quite uncomfortable. I like my watch to be pretty tight, but not cutting off the blood or anything like that. And I felt that all of this sort of texture in the band strap here would pinch my wrist and sometimes pull my hair. This one's much smoother. I had the Apple Watch Series 3, and now I have the Apple Watch Series 4, and this is so smooth. Sometimes these holes leave imprints on your skin, but it is never an issue. It's just so smooth and comfortable. And the Nike Plus band has more holes to help with perspiration. This is probably a controversial one because you probably shouldn't take calls and texts while riding, but it happens, and sometimes I'm running late for lunch or family events, and so it's super nice to be able to just raise that watch and tell Siri to text my wife that I'm running late, or to respond to other riders that I'm meeting up with, or any real scenario where you might want to communicate with somebody and you need to do it while you're moving, instead of stopping, getting your phone out and responding, which is probably safer. But of course there's scenarios where you might be on a trail or on gravel road, or there's just no traffic and you want to do this, or you just don't want to take your phone out. The Garmin does allow responding to text messages, but only when you're using it with Android, and they are canned responses, so you have to input responses to text messages that you might want to know that you want to respond with. So things like okay, yes, no, and you can sort of tap them and respond. That feature is not available with Garmin and iOS. The third one here, one tap to start on Strava, the Strava app on the Apple Watch. If you open the Strava app, you can just find your sport and tap it, and it sort of just starts tracking. You should be aware that the GPS isn't always immediately connected, and you can't tell if it is or not. So there may be a period of time between when you hit that start button and the time when the GPS actually locks on to your device. The Garmin device does do a good job of telling you when GPS is locked on, but I think it's like maybe 3 clicks to get to your sport before you can actually start, and then you have to hit start twice. You have to select it and then hit start to start the sport once, I think once the GPS is activated. It seems pretty small, but it's something I noticed and it was sort of annoying. Another really small thing is instant Strava upload when you're using the Strava app, and the same could be true for any of the other fitness tracking on this watch, because it's so closely integrated with the Apple Watch. As soon as I finish my Strava event and hit save, it is instant. It just goes right to Strava. With Garmin Connect and the Forerunner, you save your activity and then it goes to Garmin Connect first. Well, first of all, you have to open Garmin Connect for the device to sync, for the watch to sync to Connect, and then eventually it goes to Strava. So there's a bit of a delay there. But Garmin Connect is really nice too. There's a great interface for seeing all of your activities, and data. And then here's one that a lot of people probably don't think about for cycling. With the watch, you can take pictures from it, and by from watch I mean you can set your phone somewhere and then see the viewport on your watch to see if you're inside the viewport. And why I like this when I'm riding, and even outside of riding with my family and things, I can set the phone somewhere. I have a little tripod that I could carry, or maybe I set it on a rock or somewhere, and then I can sort of move into the frame of view and take the picture with my watch and get some really cool pictures for social media or whatever you might be taking pictures for. Voice control is really handy for when I'm on the bike. I think it probably goes back to doing texts while riding, but I can activate the camera from the watch. I can say, hey Siri, take a picture, and it will activate my phone's camera. And so here in Michigan it gets really cold and I'm always wearing gloves. Some of them aren't conductive, so you can't actually hit the touch interface, but you can typically control a lot of things with voice. And so if I want to take a picture with my phone, I don't have to take my gloves off to activate the phone camera. I can tell my watch to actually open the phone camera, which is really nice. Nightstand mode. Um, the obvious downside to this watch is the battery life. It only lasts, I think, anywhere from 18 to 24 hours. But I've found that it's really not an issue. I don't really like wearing my watch at night, so I throw it on my nightstand and charge it, and it becomes a little nightstand watch, which is really useful for me if I need to know what time it is in the middle of the night, or if it's early in the morning and I need to get my kids to school. I just glance over and see it. And then these two go hand in hand. With nightstand mode, if you have an alarm set, there's this really nice feature that I like where I think it's like a few minutes before your alarm goes off, it activates a light and it eases you into waking up. There's been times where this light wakes me up before my alarm goes off, and it's so much more refreshing than a immediate alarm that sort of jolts you out of sleep. It really small feature, but it's something that I really enjoyed from the Apple Watch. Quick weather check. You can put weather on this screen and see it in real time, and it is on the Garmin watch. You have to navigate down to the weather widget. It's not on the primary watch face, and I think that's because it would probably drain the battery a little bit more if it had a real-time weather feed on the watch face itself. But then on the Garmin, I've found that oftentimes it has trouble reconnecting to Garmin Connect to get the weather. So there's many times where I would try to check the weather right before a ride or when I'm trying to dress for the ride, and it would say it needs to reconnect to Garmin Connect. And so I have to go to my phone anyways to check the weather, and it sort of defeated the purpose of not being near my phone when I wanted to check the weather. So super nice to be able to have it right here on the watch face, and it's seemingly accurate most of the time. If not, maybe it's draining the battery a little bit, but it's still a benefit to me. And then finally, I really primarily ride in the morning, in early mornings, and I wake up early for work and all these other things when traveling to the airport or anything. It's super nice to just be able to tell my watch to wake me up at a certain time, and that's it. Like I don't have to press any more buttons. It takes 3 seconds and my alarm is set, and any alarm I can imagine. With the Garmin Forerunner, to set an alarm, it was probably like a dozen different clicks, and then to sort of change it, it was the same amount of clicks, and it was sort of super painful, and not a lot of choices with regard to the sounds and alerts that wake you up. I'm not sure, actually I don't even know if Apple Watch has a lot of choices either. I've never really changed the default option. So those are all the sort of benefits that not a lot of people talk about with respect to the Apple Watch and cycling and sort of your lifestyle centered around cycling. There are some negatives, of course, and primarily battery life. That's the main reason I switched to the Forerunner, was that I wanted something that I didn't have to charge every day, and the Forerunner certainly does that. You charge it probably every week and a half. I don't really, this is a very subjective thing, but I don't like the square shape of the Apple Watch. I really enjoyed the circular watch face of the Forerunner. Obviously this won't work with Android if you have an Android phone. And then there's somewhat limited data that Apple Watch provides for activities, but there's so many other ways you can extract data from your activities with other sensors or other applications, or maybe you just don't care about data so much. But I think it does an okay job, with heart rate, between heart rate and mileage and cadence, or not cadence, speed, time, all the very fundamental things you'd expect. And then a couple more negatives for the Forerunner is, it's basically just a fitness watch. Just keep that in mind. It's centered around tracking fitness. It's not that comfortable, in my opinion. Your mileage may vary in that regard. It's obviously not a smartwatch. It has aspects of a smartwatch. You can see alerts and weather, but it's pretty limited. And then the interface and experience is really pretty rudimentary, sometimes hard to use. So ultimately, if I'm to reiterate, if I'm wearing something on my watch all day, I want it to do a lot more than what the Forerunner was capable of doing, and that's primarily why I'm switching back to the Apple Watch. But as you saw, I hope I sort of gave you some information that would help you make a decision on why you might want an Apple Watch over a Garmin device or any other device out there. They're both great watches, and if you're super into fitness and doing multiple events and multiple sports and just active all day, the Forerunner is probably a great watch for you. Or if you're doing long events, like longer than 4 hours, you probably need something like the Garmin Forerunner. Thanks.